I am Dr. Terry Barnhart. I'm an associate scientist in the Department of Psychology. And usually when I'm in this classroom, I'm talking to research methods students who are kind of interested in what I'm saying. So you guys are a welcome change. So on behalf of the Charles E. On behalf of the, is that loud enough? On behalf of the Charles E. Schmidt College of Science and Dean Valerie Forbes, I want to welcome you to Frontiers in Science. And as you probably know, Frontiers in Science is a series of presentations on a wide variety of topics. This semester, we've had presentations on nuclear fusion, climate change, American conspiracy theories, just to name a few of the topics. And so it's been a pretty good year for Frontiers in Science. So along with Dean Valerie Forbes, this series would not be possible without the assistance of two members of her staff. So this year, Zachary Greathouse and Brittany Bonner have been really helpful. Zachary is the Director of Communications for the college, and Brittany is the Community Engagement Coordinator. And so I'd just like to acknowledge their leadership and assistance. So thanks, Zachary and Brittany. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, our final speaker of the year. Dr. Nichole Lighthall is an assistant professor, soon to be an associate professor, in the Department of Psychology at the University of Central Florida, where she heads the Adult Development and Decision Lab. Her academic training is impressive. Dr. Lighthall earned her BA in psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, and her Ph.D. in gerontology at the University of Southern California. She then completed her postdoctoral training at the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience at Duke University. And despite her relatively young career, Dr. Lighthall is the recipient of federal funding from the National Institute of Health and the recipient of state funding from the Florida Department of Health. The goals of Dr. Lighthall's research program are to understand the brain's role in making decisions, to identify age-related vulnerabilities in decision-making, and to identify ways to guard against those vulnerabilities. Besides being an author of numerous scientific papers, Dr. Lighthall is a frequent media commentator on science-based solutions for community problems, most recently on protecting aging adults from scams and fraud. So after Dr. Lighthall's talk, there will be a brief question and answer period in which the audience can ask questions of our speaker. And now let's please give a warm welcome to Dr. Lighthall.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you to everybody that I got to meet with today. I've had such a warm welcome. This is my very first time at FAU. I am a Californian, as you might have guessed, from my educational background, and I've had a wonderful visit here at the campus. I'm also loving the intergenerational audience that I've seen. I've never had people this young in a talk that I've given before. So I'm super excited, and I hope this is an approachable topic for you all. So I'm going to start with a quiz. You guys thought you were going to get through the end of the school year without more work, but guess what? You're not. We're going to talk about deception, risk for deception in all ages of adulthood. So I want you to ask yourself this question. Is this headline true or false? The Federal Reserve is to launch a digital currency app that will eliminate physical cash. Now, are we going to be brave and raise our hands to this, or do you prefer to keep it to yourself? Okay, do you think it's true? Do you think it's false? Okay, I'm not going to give you the answer. Until the end, you have to stick around. All right, more quiz. Who would you trust more with an investment? The person on the left or the person on the right? I'm not going to ask for your answers to these. You just think about them inside. Also, would you trust me with an investment? We've just met. Would you give me some money and maybe I will quadruple that money and then I will consider giving you back some of that money? Now, a decision you're going to make right now will be based on first impressions. First impressions. So you would be judging me based on maybe my resume, maybe based on my looks or my gender or other kinds of demographic variables. But once we get to know one another over the course of this talk, you will have other data, which is what we call it in science, right? Evidence, experiences. Maybe you can make a more educated decision at that point. I'm going to ask you this question again at the end of the talk. Now, what if you discovered that someone you love stole money from you? Think about someone that you love. Maybe an adult child or a child, or a spouse or a partner or a friend. If you open your wallet and you strongly suspected they were the only one who had access to that money, what would you do? These are the kinds of complex decisions that we try to consider how we can scientifically interrogate in the lab. Because falling victim to scams and fraud is not just about how good your cognition is in detecting the loss. It's also how much you care for that person, right? Your investment in that person and other kinds of social and emotional goals. So my major question in my lab is, how does aging affect how we answer these questions? The question I ask to everyone applies to everyone at all ages. But do we answer this question differently as we get older, at different stages of life? Do you suspect that's true? I see a lot of nodding heads. Cool, I can keep my job probably then, because this is what I'm investing myself in. So there's definitely some concerns in the public that older adults might be vulnerable to certain kinds of deception, exploitation. The statistics are indicating that 1 in 5 people ages 65 and older has reported being a victim of a financial fraud or abuse. And I want to point out that this statistic that's put here was a research statistic, meaning that some nice researcher asked this question of older participants and younger participants and said, have you ever been scammed or defrauded? These were not crimes reported to the police. So did these situations end after that fraud or scam? Maybe, maybe not. Older adults lose more money when they are scammed. So even if we're not sure what is the true base rates, meaning the actual number of or percentage of people scammed in the public of a particular age group, the DOJ, Department of Justice, does calculate for those that do get reported to authorities, how much money did you lose? And older adults lose more money when they are defrauded than younger people do. So it's possible that older adults might be more vulnerable to scams and fraud for whatever reason. Could also be that they are targeted more frequently. My undergrads do not have a lot of money. If I were to try to defraud them, I might just get their debt. So, but older adults more commonly have a home, right? They might have savings, they might have investments, or other things which have value. So the key questions that are keeping me up at night lately with my research program are older adults actually more vulnerable to trust violations? Just because of the number of reports are indicating that. There's a lot of things that bias what is reported. But if older adults are actually more vulnerable, why? What is it that's driving that? There's a number of factors that could cause a vulnerability, not the least of which is targeting. And then if we could find out what it is that's causing vulnerability, if it exists, what can we actually do about it? So first, we need to identify functions that impact trust perceptions. One of those we can be pretty sure about is learning and memory, among other cognitive functions. Another is what we'll call social cognition. I will explain these terms. And the last is emotions, emotional processing, emotional goals. So what role do these factors play? So with regard to the scenario I gave you at the last about the empty wallet and you suspect that someone might have taken money from you, learning and memory changes with aging would impact how you would make estimates about the likelihood that that trust was violated based on your past experiences with that person. So if you had repeated interactions with them, you would be using your memory to retrieve that information to make the likelihood judgment on whether or not they had stolen from you. So just a very simple example. If you have a grandchild who regularly comes to your house and money has been missing on many occasions where they came over, that would be different than if that had never happened before and this was the very first time. It also might be different based on whether or not that person is in dire straits financially or they're very well-to-do, right? So one of the things that we study in the lab is the typicality of behavior. So we can have people going through experiments with social partners or scenarios which involve experimental manipulations that are like interacting with a social partner to see how people track basically the average of a person's reliability and trustworthiness. For social cognition, a factor that we study is theory of mind, but we will call these two separate things which might be more relatable to you. One is called mentalizing, and the other is empathizing. So these are respectively our ability to determine another person's intentions and their feelings. And so that's important because somebody could do something, but maybe it was a mistake, right? They didn't mean to take from you, and there's some way for you to interact with them and detect that state of mind or their feelings of regret, guilt. So even if they had actually taken the money, and you could verify that, if you knew that they felt bad about it, it will impact your judgments of trust and the way that you interact with them in the future. So in the scenario, we would be sitting together and we would be wondering, for this particular pair of people, what are my social partner's feelings and what are their intentions? I know that people are doing this all the time on the dating market, right? When you're in those apps and people are messaging each other and going on first dates, everybody's trying to figure out what the other person's thinking and feeling, their trustworthiness and the likelihood that they would be a valuable partner in the future. Finally, emotions. Emotions impact trust, certainly. We use our own feelings in response to an event that is a perceived trust violation to guide our behavior. If that loss that we suffered really hurt us, it's going to have a different impact on behavior than if it was no big deal and it was just a minor thing and we were just having a great day. I mean, just think about yourself. If you ever, there's traffic here, just like there is in Orlando where I'm from, and you've just had a miserable day and you're very frustrated, right? And then somebody does one wrong move to you on the freeway, you might blow your top. And that feeling of aggravation, anger, etc., can cause you to act in a certain way. It can also cause you to judge people differently. So we've established some categories of factors that could impact trust-related perceptions and behavior. The next thing we need to know if we want to understand how this plays out across the lifespan, adult lifespan, is how aging affects those individual factors. Because we could look at trust behavior by itself, right? But we won't know what's driving the differences in that behavior. So we need to make some principled hypotheses about the way in which these factors are going to change. And so we have learning and memory, social cognition, and emotions all changing in a particular way. This is put into a recently developed model. So Terry thankfully did my introduction, and part of that, which you might not have heard, but I will repeat it, is that I wanted to, when I started my career, to develop a model of decision-making in aging. I did it. Here it is. I have a couple of models, working models so far. This is a model that we've developed based on social decision-making specifically to understand what drives the differences between younger and older people. It's called SISTA, which is changes in integration for social decisions in aging. So to orient you to this model, decision-making in general is thought to involve 3 key processes that occur in a particular order. We receive information from the outside world or from our internal states that tells us about gains and losses that we could potentially experience in a given decision scenario. So that's like you doing your evaluation of like what you stand to gain, what you stand to lose in any given choice that you have. The next stage is called the integration stage. That's where you're basically bringing in all the other information that you might have about that choice option, that partner, that scenario, these likelihoods. And you're basically saying, okay, I know what I stand to gain and lose, but now I'm calibrating that more clearly for this particular event, this particular moment in time, this particular person. And then that leads to our motivated state when we actually land on the decision and we act on it. That's called decision behavior. So it turns out this integration stage, where all the different data is coming in from your experiences, from your life, from your impressions, from your gut feelings, they get brought together, and that's what's going to lead to your assessment of the value of the choice that you have in front of you, whatever that may be. It involves social cognition, learning, memory, and emotions. And again, all 3 of these factors are processed at this stage. They're all coming together. You can see that this is a very complex stage of processing. And guess what? Each of these factors, again, they change with age. But guess what? They change in different ways. They have unique patterns of change. It's not that they all get worse or get better. So that makes the predictions that we are going to make on behavior much more complicated, but we're going to get into it. So in addition to that, this is the other neural model that I have. This is irrespective of social cognition or social decision-making specifically. I want to let you know, especially to our non-student audience or non-neuroscience audience, that the brain changes with age. But the various regions of the brain do not change with age at the same rate. And I'm talking about, let's forget about Alzheimer's disease or any other kind of dementias. Let's say you live to your 110 years before you pass away, and you have excellent cognitive functioning. Nonetheless, you will still have changes to your brain tissue with healthy aging. But not every brain region changes at the same rate. So I've given you my schematic here. The darker regions, I've noted, decline more with age than those that are the light gray or the white. These are more well preserved. And these regions, the ventral tegmental area and the amygdala, one in the brainstem and then the amygdala in and of itself near the hippocampus, stays pretty stable. What do those regions do in decision making? Anybody can answer? Okay, I'll take this one. What they do is they help generate signals about our emotional states and the value of potential options in the environment. So that means that in aging, those things tend to be pretty stable. But guess what else? They're pretty specifically helping us with positive emotions and positive states, especially the ventral tegmental area, which is a part of the dopamine system that's giving us that signal of reward, like, oh yeah, I want to go to Vegas, man, like I'm going to make a bunch of money, and you're just full of dopamine. So these are signals essentially for gains and positive scenarios. The anterior insula is also signaling about like the potential value of things, choices that we may have, but it's for negative ones usually, aversive experience. We learned about the anterior insula initially in neuroscience from studies of disgust. If you put a disgusting taste on someone's tongue, a horrible bitter taste, the anterior insula becomes activated. But guess what it also does? It's activated in response to disgusting behaviors and actions, morally despicable behavior, ethically despicable behavior. So what does it mean that it declines a lot in aging, in normal aging? What do we think? It means that things which are potentially negative experiences that are giving us negative signals about aversive things, aversive people, we should maybe avoid. It's possible that as we get older, those signals are getting weaker. So we might have less signal from our bodies and our brains that dangerous or negative things are in our environment compared to young people. And then these in the middle are integration regions for assessing the value of things. They're in the moderate range of decline. Those are regions which basically work together to tell us what the value is of things that we integrate from repeated experiences. So that means we're going to have some trouble as we get older with assessing how good a decision is based on repeated past experience. I'll give you a scenario. You have a neighbor move in next door, brand new, right? And you're going to figure out over time if you like that person or you hate them or something in between. And how you figure that out is repeated experiences where over days, weeks, months, you continuously update and get that information so that you're not just going off your first impression, but you continuously update it. So that's what those regions do. So there'll be some decline in that and a lot more decline in these cortical regions, posterior parietal and lateral prefrontal regions, which are involved in things like attention, executive function, deliberative processing. So our ability to exert control over our thought processes does decline more with aging and tracking details of experiences that we've had. All right, so now let's go to my questions under each of these. So let's talk about that memory. So we don't know yet what happens to trust-related decision-making with aging, but we're trying to make some good guesses using this model. How does memory change with age? Now, I'm going to preview, there's lots of kinds of memory. Not just one, there's many, and they change at different rates and a little bit different directions too. So with age, memory for the specific events that we've experienced declines, and we rely on context cues to get the gist out of our experiences. We're basically trying to understand how generally good something is, but a lot of times we might forget specific events. So in my scenario about the neighbor, you might say, look, man, this neighbor, I don't like him so much. You might have forgot that 2 weeks ago, he brought you over some fresh baked cookies. That's a detail. So that's an episodic detail from episodic memory, but you could have the general sense that, well, that was sort of a once in a very long while kind of behavior, but overall, he's actually not a very nice guy. So I get the gist of it, but I forgot the detail. So semantic memory and implicit memory are stable or could increase somewhat as we get older, and working memory and episodic memory go down strongly as we get older. So this also means, so let me explain, semantic memory is like our memory for knowledge and facts. Who was the first US president? Louder, thank you. There you go, in the front row, nice. In Washington, D.C., very good, an extra detail, I love that. That is knowledge. Do you guys remember how you learned that George Washington was the first president of the United States? Who taught you that? Daddy? Do you remember when Daddy taught you that? What day was it? You can't remember that. Why can't he remember that? He can't remember that because that's a detail that you lost. You had it at first, but it's gone. You just have the knowledge, which is great, but you lost some of the details. And that's semantic memory. So we can lean on our world knowledge when we're missing information about episodic details, because a lot of times that's not super important. Implicit memory is that type, what I was saying about this kind of incremental learning. You might forget that every individual happenstance of every single interaction with a particular person, but we're getting a general sense for how good or bad these things are. Okay, and then episodic memory, again, those details, we lose those, and the working memory is our ability to hold in our conscious awareness a particular thought. So I'm taxing your working memory right now, big time. I'm giving you lots of information that I'm asking you to hold in your head and carry forward. You guys are working that working memory right now. All right, so can we show that indeed these different age-related patterns exist? We definitely have seen this in non-social decision-making. The literature on this is quite extensive, but because social decision-making aging is a relatively new field, especially the cognitive neuroscience of such, we're going from the established literature to make these predictions. So this is a task called the Iowa gambling task. It's quite well established. And in this task, you get 4 decks of cards. All the decks can lead to both gains and losses. And you're basically just trying to pick through trial and error which decks give the best overall return. You know you're going to suffer some losses, but some of the decks actually give you money back. Just like your favorite slot machine in Vegas, right? They definitely don't win every time. You can say this machine is hot. Doesn't mean you don't lose some money, but overall you're going to get paid. So it turns out with this task, as we predict, older adults in the green are not performing as well as younger adults. They're not learning as well which decks are predicting the best possible outcomes over time. They're making some gains, though, from when they started. And it turns out, so they show less learning. And something you should also notice, the largest gap is later when the younger adults can often name which deck is best. So early on, people really don't know which one is best because they don't have enough experience and there's a lot of variance in their experiences. But at the end of the game, most younger adults could say with pretty strong confidence, well, deck number 1 is very good or deck A is very good, and they'd be right about that. But older adults have a harder time with that. That ability to specifically and explicitly name which one is best is a part of episodic memory. So even though they learned some things, they're still having trouble with that verbalizable, concrete acknowledgement of which of these decks is best. But here's an interesting finding and a twist on this study, is that if we break down the older adult group, there was 38% of the older adult group showed exceptionally good learning, equal to younger adults. So if we pull out the part of the sample that learned the task well, they're performing at the level or above the younger adult group. But what's dragging down the average is this group right here of the impaired older adults. So they showed so what you're looking at, this 0 line right here, means chance performance. You're just choosing randomly. This means that the impaired older adults categorically were picking the wrong choice, like habitually. Why did they do that? Well, the decks are set up in such a way that the bad decks give really good returns a lot of the time, and then every once in a while, a really big loss. But the loss is so big that it doesn't make up for all of the gains that you earned along the way. And again, that's a part of that memory system that we worry about, where people are basically losing track of maybe a really substantial loss. Like, this is very applicable to the real world, right? You can have an excellent relationship with your adult son or daughter. I'm speaking to the seniors in the room, right? You have an excellent relationship with them, but every once in a while they do something totally heinous. Is their behavior overall good or not good? So that's a subjective judgment, but you have to take it in the context of all of the experience that you have together. It's a very difficult problem to solve, but you may also forget or lose track of some of those large losses. Okay, so the moral of this story is aging doesn't impact everybody the same way. We can feel pretty sure that this group of people right here with the green line were potentially preclinical Alzheimer's or something like that. Maybe they hadn't been diagnosed at that point in time, but those would be the folks we would worry about in the future progressing to a level of cognitive decline, which would be considered clinical. But on the bright side, 38% of the seniors in the group had no trouble at all learning from repeated experiences, which is a great thing. And we can't all control how well we age to get into that category, but things like mobility, nutrition, sleep, and other positive health behaviors can help us have a higher likelihood to be in the elite group. Okay, now what happens if we add on to this task some faces and tell our participants that other people in the study develop these decks? So some of the decks are bad, right? Some of them are tricky. What if the participant believes that some potentially nefarious person put together the bad decks and other decks were good? And we also pair those decks with faces instead of just these standard bicycle cards. So these pictures, by the way, I'm putting in the green, a category of faces that were rated in advance as untrustworthy, more untrustworthy than the other faces. The differences are small, so small that you might not be able to perceive it, but people are nonetheless biased by these pictures. Both younger and older adults are. We're going to put them in two different scenarios. In the congruent case, we have untrustworthy faces with a bad deck. And in the incongruent face, we have trustworthy looking faces with a bad deck. And we have the exact opposite for advantageous ones. This is the category that we're kind of most worried about with exploitation. Right here, this one. They look nice, but they lead to a lot of losses over time. That's what we call the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Or the friendly con artist. So let's see what happens when we add these social elements to the task and what the age differences look like in that case. So what we see, this is the younger adults on the left. The standard Iowa gambling task with no faces is shown here. The younger adults are learning very well from that. You can see that overall, the older adults, as you saw in the previous experiment, whether there's faces or not, they're showing lower performance. So we do observe that older adults are having learning and memory problems generally, whether there's faces or not. And in the congruent condition with the blue bar, this is some hopeful evidence right here. When the face looks like the behavior, it's a trustworthy looking person with trustworthy behavior, older adults lean on that visual cue and they do better from the start. Similar to younger adults, it looks like older adults are a little higher, but that difference is not significant. Both of them basically have the same experience. I want to caution you though on interpreting this blue line as completely good. So what it means is congruent cues of the person's social identity as trustworthy and trustworthy behavior led to better performance. But you can see in both the younger and older adults, the participants' behavior did not increase very much. It kind of stayed flat. That means that people, once they were getting a reliable social cue and behavior, they weren't optimizing that option very well. Instead, we see basically impaired performance in the incongruent condition. That's the green one right here. So again, these are people who are the wolf in sheep's clothing. They look friendly, but they're not giving good behavior. And they show both younger and older adults quite impaired performance at the beginning. They're tricked by that person. They're investing in a trustworthy looking person who doesn't act trustworthy. The younger adults recover from that very quickly. They basically stop paying attention to the faces rather quickly, but older adults struggle with that more. They basically have lower performance across the task. So they get tricked by the friendly con artist. That's what the data is indicating. They don't have any, they don't have any different behavior when there's congruence between how the person is presenting and how they are acting. But when the person is tricking them, the face is not consistent with the outcomes. Older adults are showing that impairment. All right, so let's move to social cognition. How does that change as we get older, and how might it affect trust-related processing? So we see stability generally in the ability to read people's feelings, but we see decline in people's ability to read thoughts and intentions. So this is basically the empathizing. I can sense another person's feelings. It's very stable. And this makes sense with my neural model because that model is saying that feelings, especially positive feelings coming from the amygdala and the ventral tegmental area, are very stable. But mentalizing declines dramatically, the ability to read the thoughts accurately of another person, their internal thoughts and their intentions. So this is going to, again, create some problems if we put things into a social scenario. Others have detected, done these studies. These are really cool lie detection paradigms where people are shown videos of another person actually lying, and then they're to judge whether they're lying or telling the truth. And you can see that older adults and younger adults are just as good at determining who's telling the truth, but they're a little lower than proportion labeled truth. So this means that these people, these trials participant was seeing someone lying, and the older adults more frequently said that they were telling the truth. Now, they did pretty well overall. They're fairly equivalent to the younger adults, but that is where the difference is. So it's about deception detection. Just like with the last slide I was showing you, where when it's the friendly con artist, you're getting deceived, you're getting a positive outward image, but there's something nefarious happening underneath. There's a little bit of problem there. All right, how do emotions change with age, and how might that impact trust-related behavior? So we see in general decline in negative arousal, and we see a greater ability to regulate emotions, and we see that resulting in a positivity bias. We go back to the neural model I showed you before. Remember, I said the anterior insula declines a lot more in aging than a lot of other regions, and the anterior insula is coding for negative experiences that we have. So basically, we're, again, not getting that signal as much from the outside world of whether something is positive, or sorry, whether something is negative or not. Positive emotions we don't do so bad with, and indeed, this is actually a high point, I would say, in terms of well-being. My younger adults in class are very anxious. They have a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of volatile emotions. Older adults tend to be way more even-keeled. That doesn't mean euphoria all the time, but it's like contentedness and feeling emotionally stable and balanced. I think all of us can reflect on times when we were a teenager, except for these young men right here, haven't got there yet. And you will remember that you went through some highly emotionally volatile days. This ability to regulate emotions may come from an enhanced ability to regulate emotions, because you can learn that over the course of a lifetime, right? We all try on different coping mechanisms, right? But it could also come from the fact that older adults actually seem to wish to feel better more frequently. And that sounds bizarre. It sounds like young people don't wish to feel good. I gave this scenario to one of the colleagues that I met with today. You know, when you see like a horror movie come out, who goes to see it? No, not everybody. You might. I didn't see the Mario Brothers movie, but I think that would be a good one for everybody, because that's kind of happy. But the ones where limbs are getting cut off and people are, you know, these like jump scares, as we get older, we increasingly do not like this. And we opt out. When they release those movies, they're going for one age group and one age group only, 18 to 25. And some people who probably shouldn't be in the theater, but their parents said it's okay. So we regulate our emotions by controlling our thoughts, controlling our scenarios. Now, in the context of trust, in social relationships, this could also have another effect, which is a desire to maybe ignore or downplay negative experiences from social partners, because we would rather keep the peace and maintain the relationship. That is more important. And also maybe just not feel yucky. That's a fine goal. It turns out, yes, older adults do feel better. Guys, look at this negative frequency of endorsing negative affect between 18 to 34 compared to middle age and older age. This is not an appreciable difference right here, by the way. It's precipitously falling off in middle age to late life. That's great news. Now, is this happening because of goals that people have to feel better? Is it to do with coping strategies? Is it to do with the fact that the insula is declining and just not giving us as many negative signals from our brain? That we don't know, and that's something that our lab is trying to tease apart. Others have examined this in the context of non-social decision-making. They look at, this is the nucleus accumbens, which is one of these positive dopamine reward regions. This is the anterior insula. This is processing aversive information. And you see that younger adults and older adults, when you're increasing the amount of money someone's winning in a game, you're seeing very similar profiles in the nucleus accumbens to those positive rewards. So older brains respond just as well as younger brains to positive information. But as we get older, we're seeing younger adults responding very strongly to losses, and older adults are basically having more or less of a flat response. So again, are they trying to regulate their emotions when they're in the MRI or fMRI experiment? We can't really say for sure. Doesn't seem like they would have a strong reason to do so, but sometimes people have goals that we're not aware of. In addition, this leads to overall a positive picture in aging. Seniors typically have greater emotional stability consistent with their goals to avoid negative states. It's kind of curvilinear, but it stays very high and higher than early life. This is a scatter plot of real data. You can see a lot of variability, but those are the averages mapped on, and you can still see that it's a nice pattern of emotional stability with age. So what does this mean? Well, we can see impacts on trust-related decision-making. We can infer that. We'll see lower responses to cues of untrustworthiness. I showed you in my last study slide that we showed people untrustworthy-looking faces. We don't know, though, because that was a behavioral experiment, what was their brain response in the areas that process negative cues. But others have looked at just responses to those same type of faces. And older adults are basically showing in the gray, diminished response to the untrustworthy faces. So what we're expecting is that when we show older adults an untrustworthy face, the anterior insula is going to activate strongly like it does in younger adults, but it's way down here. So that's indicating that anterior insula is not responding strongly to those cues of untrustworthiness. Now you could argue very well and very easily, we should not judge people based on their appearances, right? Well, that's not a reliable signal, right? Don't judge a book by its cover, and well said. That is a good moral rule, but it still indicates something about the way the brain is processing information and that it's changing with age. Again, we don't know exactly why, but we can see from the evidence that it is the case that it does change. It is different. Furthermore, people seem to have less distrust for untrustworthy-looking people. These are those faces again, trustworthy-looking faces, neutral ones, untrustworthy ones, and then how much the participants subjectively said those people were trustworthy. Younger adults say the untrustworthy-looking faces are very untrustworthy-looking, and older adults give a kinder judgment. Now, again, we have to wonder, what are they thinking inside? Are they just being kind? Have they learned their manners and are attempting to just be judicious and kind? Again, we don't know, but the data still indicates that there are changes afoot. So let's talk about the implications of these findings collectively and how we can move forward from this to understand better and make some progress on this topic. For learning and memory, we see that some seniors will learn about others' trustworthiness as well as young, but there is a category of older adults who certainly will face some major impairments. They have learning and memory deficits that put them well below, not at chance level of detecting untrustworthiness. They're categorically vulnerable to strong exploitation. We can presume that this will include people who have preclinical or clinical levels of cognitive decline, particularly those that affect learning and memory, like Alzheimer's disease. So we should rightly try to protect older adults who have these clinical conditions. Number two, older adults have greater difficulty overcoming initial social biases. Wherever they kind of start with, whether for the good or for the ill, seems to be a pattern that will continue longer. Now, I want to give you the caveat, though, that we don't know at this point whether these effects we're observing are specific to social decision-making at all. They may purely be any decision scenario. Doesn't matter if people are involved or not. If you have significant deficits in learning and memory, it may have exactly the same impact on decision-making about people and decision-making involving no social element whatsoever. All right, how about social cognition changes? We see that older adults are better able to read others' emotions than their intentions, and they might be more vulnerable to fraud when there's genuine expression of emotion and need. So this is a tricky one, and I didn't get into this, but I want to say it plainly. A lot of times when someone is exploiting someone else, defrauding them, especially if they're a loved one, which an estimated 80% of older adults are financially defrauded by a close social partner. That person may take from them for a good reason. They might be poor, destitute, in dire straits. They might, like many do, intend to pay them back, truly intend to pay them back. And they feel awful about it. They feel guilty, they feel sorrowful. When they express those emotions of guilt, sorrow, and regret, those are going to be powerful signals to keep the older adult on their side, and we need to be aware of that. All right, emotional changes. Seniors are less sensitive to negative outcomes compared to positive outcomes, and might be more biased to focus on emotional expressions, but less sensitive to cues of untrustworthiness. So I want to end on time. Yay, Brittany, I saw your number back there. With a thank you to my funders who have supported this work and are continuing to fund us as we explore these topics in the lab and in the field. Florida Department of Health, the Moore's Alzheimer's Research Grant we have. These are with colleagues at UF and University of Miami. We have a consortium among our 3 institutions to try to solve these problems using both behavioral and neuroimaging methods, and the National Institutes of Health, which are supporting our basic science research, including fMRI experiments, and a very cutting-edge study that we're going to conduct in about 2 to 3 years, where we're going to try to actually actively manipulate brain activity to enhance social decision function in aging. Thank you. Oh, that's a good question. Do you want to come to my lab and I can show you? Okay, when you guys come to see Mickey Mouse, you can come to see me.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Lighthall?
What age group is these people that bought the cryptocurrency?
Sorry, can you
The
repeat?
age group that bought
The
the
age group for
cryptocurrency.
older adults?
The cryptocurrency. What age group is it that bought that?
Sorry, can you say it one more
The
time?
age group that bought into the cryptocurrency.
Oh, the cryptocurrency. Younger adults.
And do you think it's a scam?
I cannot comment on that, but I'm so happy you brought that up. I want to say something about that specifically. The studies that we're doing specifically for the Florida Department of Health, which is about identifying misinformation and deception in Florida elders, we're looking a lot at digital methods of fraud, including fake news, including phishing, including deep fakes, and the social components like I discussed here. I don't know, and I do not feel comfortable to say that in general, older adults are scammed more or more vulnerable than younger people at this point. I actually don't think that's true, and I'll tell you why. The internet is a tool for maleficence, for malfeasance. It is a way to scam, and who is online the most? Younger people. They make themselves quite vulnerable when they do that. And there is also a generational difference in the degree to which people have the rule of protecting their private information, including social security information, bank information, passwords. I've had older adults that I have had in my study. I tried to pay them $100 to do my study, and they said, "You want me to give you my social security number to get that check? No, thank you. I will take, you can just keep that $100. Truly, would my younger adults ever do that? Absolutely not. Never. So I don't think that we can understand at this point who gets scammed the most, which age group, but I feel very comfortable to say that they will, it depends on the modality of the scam. I think that digitally based scams, there's a very high likelihood that younger people get scammed more. Now, I still think the statistic is probably correct regarding who loses the most money. And that has to do with who has the most money. Our younger adults do not have the equivalent asset of a home. So just right there alone, that's something that will, even if they get scammed of all of their money, it may not be that much. So, but I think things like cryptocurrency and other things like that, which are very much targeting, they're targeting younger people. They're not targeting older people with those kinds of approaches. So we say when you're trying to detect something, just test a lot. I think when you're trying to scam somebody, just try a lot, and some of them will get through, and I think that is true. So scams based in digital media, social media. Many older adults, apparently in the last Pew Research study, 25% of older adults did not identify themselves as regular internet users, 25%. It's not you guys. You guys are out on the town, you know, coming to classes and things. So it's going to be a different estimate. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, it's not a satisfying one, but I do think that's an important point to consider.
All right, I'll get back to you.
So perhaps one of the biggest scams that basically destroys people's lives is gambling, right? So we have lottery, the house always wins, right? So we have the lottery where clearly,
Mhm.
you know, the chances of winning versus losing is a much better chance than winning, and it
Mhm.
depends on the game, what the probability is. But, you know, people destroy their lives
Mhm.
by gambling off their money. And
Mhm.
so that also can be related to these social decision making, because they're often doing it in a group or doing it as a family or going
Yeah,
to
the
Vegas
like
together.
riverboat gambling tours, and they go
Riverboat
with their
gambling
friends.
tour,
And,
yeah,
mhm.
and
Yeah,
so-
it's complicated.
And so the reward structure that keeps people
Yeah.
gambling, and the
Right.
kinds of people who are willing to take that kind of risk. So
Mhm.
the piece that I wonder about here is a personality factor
Right, right.
related to
Yeah.
risk taking.
We have lots of personality measures in our protocol. So our protocol includes a lot of factors. A key factor we are concerned with is loneliness. That would speak to exactly what you're saying. It's not a personality trait per se, right? Like, but it could affect a person's likelihood to engage in gambling socially or not, right? Just you're trying to get that hit of dopamine. But you may also be looking for a social situation which is satisfying. So yeah, I agree that there's no doubt that the situation is very complicated. You know, it's easy, I shouldn't say that, I'll offend people. It's easier to study things in the lab when you can control everything. But the fact of the matter is, if we want to ever make science that makes good predictions about what people do in the real world, we have to take into account factors like, okay, well, is this really non-social? Is this a non-social decision? Or because it's in a social context, it's still, they're still doing things like what we call in decision science, subjective reward means the overall value of the choice. And it's not just related to the money you would get back from the payout. It's also the whole experience. And many people who enjoy gambling, yeah, I'm sure they love to win more, but they like the whole experience to some level.
Thank you. You touched upon two subjects here that I'm pretty much an expert in, because I've done conferences for the online gambling industry for years.
Okay.
I can tell you all about Vegas and everything, but that'll be later. With regard to your research, a thought also that I have for you as well. Again, I dealt with conferences that dealt with scams, particularly online scams, so I'm very familiar with the entire gamut there as well. One of the things that came out of it from multiple people that were doing research on it, they came to the same conclusion. Each one of these guys independently came to the same conclusion. What they learned is that most of the scammers that you see, mostly I'm talking about online scams. I'm not talking about industrial scams like scammers. Like gambling. I'm talking about these individual like romance scammers and things.
Oh, yeah.
They honestly believe, they believe they are not scamming.
Yes.
And when you're looking at it from 100 miles out, you're like, you're out of
Yes.
your mind. You're stealing money. People, they honestly believe they're
Yeah.
not scamming. And this was also in the crypto space because there was a lot of that.
Yeah, they're trying to give you an opportunity.
But that part of that, it engages, it sort of complicates your research in
Yeah.
the sense that there's one way to say, okay, I'm going to scam you. And I know what I'm doing. And that was my intention. But if I honestly don't believe I'm scamming you, even though the act is still the same, your trust level in me is going to be higher, as opposed to if I'm.
Yeah, that's one thing I was mentioning at the end with regard to genuinely expressed emotions. So the grandson or granddaughter, whoever who takes from your wallet and they say, I didn't steal, I was going to pay you back. And they believe that, even though all the evidence points to the contrary. I think that's, yes. And that's complicated for anybody who's facing those situations. I don't endorse a lot of media, right? These kind of things. I'm a scientist, but Tinder swindler and some of these other kind of romance scam things that have been put out on Netflix and stuff, they're an excellent depiction of this problem. They are called relationships of undue influence. And they can be romantic scams. They are targeting young people too, for sure, older people as well, people who have resources to steal, not the poorest people, people who can give you something back. And yeah, it's totally complicated. So when we assess these things like in the lie task where people are, so in the lie task, it's very interesting. It's video recordings of people who had been accused of a crime. And after the fact, they gave testimony or some interview on whether they did it or not. And of course, everybody says they didn't do it. And then after the fact, some like gold standard data, like genetic data, was used to determine whether in fact they did do the crime or not. And participants are judging the likelihood that this video they're watching is someone telling the truth or telling a lie. We know the ground truth behind whether they actually did the thing. It doesn't matter whether the inmate or the accused person thinks they were innocent or not, it doesn't matter. It's just about what are the signals? There's got to be potentially some signals that we could use and lean on to make a good judgment, even if they're very effectively lying to us. So in that sense, we can be blind to those things, but it certainly makes the problem much harder. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Okay, go for it.
I can hear you. In the experiments? Yeah, this is actually something we're going to try to investigate. We have to develop a new protocol for this. Now, one thing that's complicated is in a scientific study, and this is well known, people in physics know this. When you record something, you can change it. So by asking someone about looking for certain things, did you change your mind? Is it something different about them now than there was on the last trial? You're now making the participant think about it where they might not have been thinking about it. And when they try to think about it, they do deliberate and they process the information differently in a way they wouldn't in their real life because you've asked them the question at a particular time. So we can't do that all of the time. We can't always be asking people how they feel and how they think while they're going through the experiment to get that data. Because if we did, we're going to basically force them to be more deliberative about their choices than they otherwise would. The gold standard for us in determining if someone trusts another person is their behavior. Interestingly, the subjective judgments and the behavior do not always go together. So people may say, I don't think this person's trustworthy, but they show no differentiation between that person and one who looks more trustworthy, for example, in terms of how much they will invest in them in these experiments. And by the way, we use real money in these games. So there's real financial stakes, and the participants should definitely be trying to perform the task to their ultimate advantage because they will walk away with more cash. So yeah, we are planning to do that, but we are going to do it for some select studies. They're called think aloud paradigms, where we basically ask people to kind of like constantly update us on what they're doing and how they're making their choices. So another way we can do that is through computational modeling. So we can basically look at every trial within these repeated experience and see when is it that the participant made a shift and what is it that happened before that caused the shift. For example, it could be the case that the thing that drives distrust from trust is a very large loss. Like I will not tolerate $1,000 loss, but I will tolerate $500, you know? It could be the case also that what drives that behavior is repeated losses, repeated trust violations in a row. And we actually don't know the answer to this question, whether it's the consistency of the behavior. Sometimes inconsistent behavior, even if good things are happening between, people don't like that. People do not like to be around chaotic social partners. They want to be able to predict their behavior. And we are not sure the degree to which people will forgive a very large loss if it's in the context of a lot of other good things. So we're going to look at that as well. That's a great question.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
First, my question is, when you mentioned that older adults are more affected by expressions of emotion that are by the deceiver, what are some actionable, actions that they can take to perhaps lessen the amount they are affected by that expression of emotion?
Right. So I think some studies in other kinds of scenarios with biases have been successful in doing warnings and trainings. So that could potentially be effective. So one of the ways that we're going to be investigating this is in that last study I talked about, which is our neurofeedback study. People are going to be doing these tasks in the MRI scanner, and they're getting functional MRI data analysis happening, and we're feeding the data right back to them and telling them, this is what your brain activity looks like, and basically they can try their own scenarios out internally to see what helps them to make the correct choice and how they can basically boost the brain signals in the regions that are helping them to make those good decisions. So we're not doing any interventions to that point, but the best advice I would say is focus on the behavior.
Right.
Focus on the behavior and try to give a good assessment of the overall value. Now, that is always embedded within the personal goals of that individual. My daughter's 3.5 years old. She does not do very much for me. I do a lot for her. So this is not a reciprocal relationship. She gives me a lot of love and great feelings. But I have a lot of messes to clean up. She doesn't pay any bills. However, do I feel that that relationship is a loss? No, it's totally fulfilling to me because my purpose in that relationship is different. And my value based on that is not open for other people's judgment. It's calibrated individually. So it also matters to know what a person is willing to tolerate, that they potentially think through that process.
Right. Okay. And then second question is on the topic of social cognition and on the part that you labeled mentalizing. Does any evidence exist that the accuracy of perceiving, or basically accuracy in social cognition, if that is affected, whether the deceiving is done digitally or in person?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know the answer to that question. Our immediate data is indicating for things like fake news, older adults have equivalent levels of accuracy in detecting fake news as younger adults. There's some indication that at very extreme old ages that might change. But that is a medium they are very familiar with, and they have more life experience than younger people do. So likewise, they would have more experience with social situations, but I think that to the degree to which the experience is highly social, and I think also with close loved ones where there is an embedded relationship, that's probably one in which they're most vulnerable. But we do think that the presence of social information like faces and body language and things like that is going to potentially be like a strong trigger. We are working right now in my lab. One of the things that we're pushing on is we're playing with this space of what's considered social. So if you talk to a bot, one of those little customer service bots, they're meant to talk like people. They use AI. And sometimes there's even a little face attached to it, which is a human face. It's someone's picture, clearly not a human person. Am I having a social interaction? Sometimes I feel like I am. And so some of these things are blurred. That's a digital space with a very social overlay on it. And then there's digital spaces which don't have much social overlay. A student of mine, his dissertation intention is to look at deception perpetrated through social media, with the idea that fake news or other kinds of deception that's transmitted through friends on social media will be not scrutinized at all to the level of those from either non-social partners or institutional entities, like a news outlet. So I'm totally out of time. I got the big red card. But I would be happy to hang out afterwards outside of the building to field your questions if you're interested. You guys have been a lovely audience. Thanks, guys, for your questions. And thanks for having me.